Greetings and welcome to Toontown, sometimes known as Genre Grinder. I'm your host, Gabe, and with me today is a collection of sequential drawings come to life named Tyler Foster.
That's me.
That's you.
I'm very animated, as you can
Yes.
You can tell by the tone of my voice.
Just like Droopy the dog. Today, we are looking at movies that combine animation and live action. And since that is a very big subject that dates back to the earliest days of film, quite literally, like some of the first movies ever were a mix of the two, we've narrowed things down to movies where they interact with each other. And we'll have an argument about this later. But for the most part, movies where animation and live action have to interact, they have to be at least like 70-30% of the movie, you know? You can't have one that just has one scene, like what's his name dancing with with Jerry the Mouse. That doesn't count. That's just one scene, or that's just like a little moment in a movie. And then to narrow it down even more, we're looking at movies that were released sort of in the wake of Bob Zemeckis' Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was, expected to be a hit, but was actually such a mega hit that it kind of inspired some movies.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these filmmakers pretend like they weren't inspired, where some of them are, and it's kind of funny to pretend that you're not inspired. But, making a movie is hard, and making an animated movie is harder, and combining the two is borderline impossible unless you have a good budget and personnel. And I'm not blaming Tyler for this. We've found some mostly awful movies to cover.
I mean, because you say that the Gene Kelly and Tom scene, which I haven't actually seen that scene, but I know what you're talking about.
Right, Gene Kelly, yeah.
You mentioned that, and you say like we like that's one scene isn't enough, and I think in retrospect, it's kind of like, because of the budget and because of the skill required, I mean, most of the examples out there, it does date back to the beginning of film, but so much of the examples that exist are short subject because it's so challenging.
Yeah. It's challenging on a million levels. And actually, one movie we were going to cover that we didn't is Evil Toons, which is super low budget movie. And I had never seen it. And just before I watched it, I looked into it, and apparently the Evil Toons is a single kind of Tasmanian devil guy, and he's on screen for less than 90 seconds. So it helped narrow it down. I don't think we should be implying that it's only worth it if it's a feature-length film that's like 70-30, but that was just kind of what we were aiming for, more to make this more handleable.
Whether those filmmakers were inspired by Roger Rabbit or not, that was what I was thinking about when I pitched the idea to Gabe that Who Framed Roger Rabbit seemed like that's a subgenre of things. Turns out maybe a much smaller subgenre of things than I had expected.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that a lot of movies, Mary Poppins, for instance, is one of the most popular movies ever made, and quite a bit of that is animated and live action people interacting. I just think that Roger Rabbit did it on such a high technical level that, I don't know, I was only about 8 years old when that came out, but I remember people being very excited and like Siskel and Ebert going crazy for it, and adults caring more about it even than kids. So it was kind of a moment. It's
one thing that's sort of interesting is, I've watched, one of the best home video documentaries that I've ever seen is on the Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It was on the DVD and now it's on the Blu-ray and the 4K and stuff. And, they talk about how groundbreaking it is and stuff. And, I thought that I understood why it was groundbreaking. And now that I've seen these other examples, it's like, oh no, I have a much better idea of what they mean by groundbreaking. I mean, I think one thing that also stands out now, having seen these other things, is not only is Roger Rabbit like technically adept, not only is the craft involved really outstanding in a way that makes it work, but I think the thing that really stands out is that the movie has the story has a reason to do this. And
Yeah.
so many of these other examples that we watched, they just do it because they can. Like
Yeah.
there's no impetus for this.
And also, Bob Hoskins deserves a lot of credit.
Yes.
And watching, I mean, one of the movies we're going to talk about was made in 2000, and there's actors struggling to interact with CG animated characters, and Hoskins was interacting with Roger Rabbit in just very realistic sense. Like, looking back, it's like an Oscar worthy performance. It just didn't feel like it when I was a kid, but like, it's one of the best performances in the 80s, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But quickly before we get into the movies, though, I know that obviously you can draw cute little guys. Anybody who follows me on social media has ever seen all the little drawings of me as either a shark or the guy with the big nipples from Dragon Ball. Those are all drawn by Tyler and colored by me.
Mm-hmm.
So he has a very distinct style of drawing, and it's very cartoonish, and I could picture it moving in my mind. Your style is sort of like the old home movies style, where the lines would be wiggling the whole time. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's necessarily what I'm going for, but
No, not yeah. That's just my
yeah.
imagination. But did you ever have any animation like classes, or did you ever try to make animation when you were younger?
I had ideas for animations, and they never panned out. But I had some notions of like a cartoon, which was a very unfeasible cartoon because when I was in junior high and high school, I drew these comics just to amuse my friends, but they were very obviously based on Star Wars, so I never would have
Oh.
been able to get away with actually making anything out of them. But
Yeah, I had a comic that was about ninja frogs, original characters. That had nothing to do with existing properties of ninja reptiles.
yeah, I mean, it's funny because even after even aside from that, like some of the friends that I had would contribute characters that got worked into the story, and then like a long time later, I would find out, oh, they were stealing their ideas from somewhere else too.
That you just weren't aware
Yeah,
of.
that I had no idea.
Well, I mean, this is also excuse for me to brag because I took a lot of animation classes over my child and teenhood. You might say I'm not very good at it, but I know what I'm talking about. You know,
Mhm.
I had two summer school elementary age things, which I learned claymation, and then I had a middle school one, and I then had in high school there was a chance to do a summer art program, and I was literally the only person who signed up, and it was a big high school. Tucson High School was a big high school, and I was it. So the teacher just let me do whatever I wanted with all. So I learned to do airbrushing, which I actually hated. So I stopped doing it. And then I realized they had an animation camera, which is just an 8mm camera rigged. And so I asked if I could do that. So I made a bunch of shorts. And then when I was in college, I kind of had to take an intro to animation. I don't remember why, but that had to do with graphic design. But my year-end project was good enough that it got included in some sort of showcase for the school. So I learned all these things, but I could never do solid objects. I could never make things uh, the look on model. I could never do that part. So the thing that I did well is I made like explosions and stuff. I could do that. You know, things that are in like organic mass and shit like that. So like, well, that's just me, you know, making sure like when Patrick and I talked about giant monster movies, I had to make it clear that I had taken a film class when I was about 7 and we made a giant monster movie. So I have expertise in both these fields.
I think really when I was in high school and stuff, I just had this notion, this like if I really am honest with myself, my secret notion was that I would come up with all of the ideas and then someone else would do the hard work of actually animating.
Right. You would maybe do some design.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, animation like sucks. It fucking sucks. It's not fun. It takes a very special person to have the patience to do it.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, so what we're going to cover here is 5 movies. We got a low budget TV movie, We got an R-rated Italian rom-com, a major studio production from a veteran animation director, a completely different surrealistic piece from a stop-motion innovator, and then we're ending it on a movie that we think is the first movie to try to do CG cell-shaded characters, so they look halfway between CG. We'll get into it later. I think we might be wrong on this. I think there might have been some of that in Space Jam, but neither one of us wanted to talk about Space Jam, so whatever. I did no research on any sort of innovation that Space Jam had done. We're old enough that neither of us has a lot of I don't know, maybe you have some sort of nostalgia for it,
I
but I
mean,
was like,
I did really want to see it when it came out. I mean,
yeah.
I think I can answer that question, but we'll get to that when we.
Yeah. So we're gonna start with we're gonna go through this one kind of quick because this was one of my picks and it's barely a movie.
It's the girl in the red truck, Charlie Brown, and this was definitely one of the ones that I was kind of like, very prominently like, why is this like? It just doesn't seem like I don't understand what the hook is. Why did somebody go for this? And then I looked at IMDb and I was like, oh, that lady is Charles Schultz's daughter.
Yeah.
That's the hook. That's the whole thing.
It's nepotism. This is it's called A Girl in the Red Truck, Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown is in it for maybe 20 seconds and he starts narrating it, but the movie is so sloppy and slapdash that he doesn't finish narrating it. It's like it's framed as this is Snoopy's. I was going to read the letterbox description, but it's actually wrong, so I'm not going to read the letterbox description. But he has Uncle Spike, or I'm sorry, Brother Spike, Snoopy's brother. He is sent them a letter, and Charlie is reading it to Snoopy. But it very quickly, like they just didn't write a plot. There's
Well,
and it's
there's kind of a plot, but it's not about the Snoopy characters. It's about this random dude and the girl in the red truck, and
yeah.
about an audition. And it's just like I don't care. Like, what does this have to do with anything? Like, I came to see the Snoopy characters.
Yeah, and there's one Snoopy character, and he's one who's not in other stuff. From what I think he might be in like one or two as like a baby in some of the flashbacks. I'm not. This was the. I looked this up. This was the 32nd primetime television special based on Charles Schultz's Peanuts, and to me, that's an insane factoid. That there are 51 total. There were already 32 by this was 1988.
I suppose I get it because I mean I would think even by 1988, like it's the Great Pumpkin and stuff. Those had already
Yeah.
become established classics, so they were just like, this is a well, and we're going to keep drawing from it until somebody tells us to stop.
I think there was more than one a year at some points, which is I kind of remember the reruns of the Pumpkin and the Christmas, maybe a Thanksgiving one. I don't remember watching all that many of them. So I think a lot of them just sort of fell by the wayside because they weren't very good, including this one, which I think people only remember because it's mostly live action and it's so strange. It was also co-written by Schultz's son, Monty Schultz. So it wasn't just his daughter that he was nepo babying. It was also his son was involved.
I did the one, like, for the first like 20 minutes. I mean, it's not like it's greatly interesting, but it does feel like sort of a traditional TV special where it's a little bit about what Spike does with his day, and then there's the girl in the red truck. But then once he gets in the truck, it just turns into something else that I don't really understand.
All bets are off.
Yeah.
It was directed by Walter C. Miller, and he mostly directed Grammy and Tony Award ceremonies and comic relief specials and stand-up specials and a couple episodes of Fame, the television series. This, I think, is his only, quote, narrative-driven feature. And I'm using narrative-driven and feature loosely because it's just under an hour because it had to be 90 minutes with commercials. And the commercial breaks are quite obvious. I'm guessing he had nothing to do with the animation, and there are quite a few credited animators, but no credited animation director. So I'm guessing the director's in there somewhere probably. I that's something I was gonna try to, because I've always been kind of annoyed that Roger Rabbit doesn't credit. I wrote it down somewhere. Yeah, it's irony here. I think I wrote it down in my notes for the other movie, but Roger Rabbit doesn't credit its animation director as a co-director.
You mean Richard
But
Williams, right?
yeah, which is something that's going to come up with the next movie, actually.
One of the things that a few things did stand out to me, but not really from the perspective of this being a genre. All of them. The first one, the one that did stand out to me, is that this movie sort of takes the easy way out, which is that anytime Spike interacts with anything, they just animated that thing.
Yeah,
So, like the girl from the red truck hands him a towel, and it's not a real towel; it's an animated towel. Uh,
yeah.
so the challenge, the quote unquote challenge, is that she takes it off the hook and hands it to him, and that's a lot easier than making that a real towel and then having the animation have to hold it.
Right, because then you have to have special effects that's holding the towel in space with nothing there.
Yeah. Or when he puts on the seatbelt is animated.
Right.
Another thing that I thought was a little bit funny was reading IMDb. This is sort of unbelievable in today's market where you would always want to be first, but they this was going to come out before Roger Rabbit, and then they realized
Mhm.
that there were similarities, so they delayed it until after Roger Rabbit. There's no explanation to that thinking, but I guess maybe they thought they would benefit from the popularity of Roger Rabbit.
The thing I found of very brief, some stuff from Aretta Grimsley Johnson wrote a book called Good Grief: The Story of Charles M. Schultz. I didn't read it. I just found Wikipedia things about it, so I read little clips. Apparently, the studio wanted to push it back to help cash in on Roger Rabbit, and Schultz was not happy with that. And in interviews, he pushed his daughter to discuss the inception date, to make it clear that they were already in production and they weren't copying Roger Rabbit. So it was something that really seems to have bothered him to be associated with that. But I couldn't find any definitive evidence that it was the producers that wanted to cash in on that. So okay. The other reason I wanted to cover this one is a sort of in joke between Tyler and I, where I have he one of his favorite movies is Romeo and Michelle's
Yeah.
high school reunion, and that shot in Tucson when my mother was working in the foothills, and she had to park in a weird spot or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think I've at this point told the story so many times that it might not even be totally true, but it was an in joke for me to have to mention any time something was shot in Tucson, in which for some reason quite a few movies were shot in Tucson in the 80s, and I don't
The
really.
fake lawns for Can't Buy Me Love.
Right, when we talked about Can't Buy Me Love and how they set this movie with a definitive plot point that the kid makes money mowing lawns, and then they got to Tucson and they went, fuck, there's no lawns. But I do remember this being filmed and hearing about it and it being on the news and stuff. And I'm pretty sure I can recognize some of the places. I'm pretty sure that Spike's little cactus house is in the on the road off of if you're going from the city of Tucson to the Desert Museum. I think he's somewhere over there. They shot a couple things at Old Tucson. I honestly couldn't tell you what, though. I didn't notice any obvious Old Tucson looking stuff. But the big thing here is that they shot a very, very elongated skating sequence at Skate Country, which was, as a kid who couldn't roller skate, was like the second worst place to have birthday parties. The worst being Chuck E. Cheese because it was terrifying there. But like I would just go sit. So I this would have been when I was 7 or 8 years old. So I would have been. This is exactly what I remember skate country looking like. So it was this weird like mix of negative feelings and nostalgia at the same time. And the scene goes on so long, and I'm guessing it's just because Jill Schultz. Now I forgot her. She's Jenny. Yeah, Jill Schultz. Jenny is the character's name.
Mm-hmm.
Jill Schultz just was a good roller skater, I guess. And so they had to build a whole thing around it.
Well, it's fitting. It's
Um,
fitting that you picked this for Tucson, because when Spike came on screen, I was like, this is like the Gabe version of Snoopy. He's got a mustache
Yeah,
and he's got a bucket hat.
honestly, my cousin's uncle on the other side always looked like Spike to me when I was a kid. Like he wasn't my uncle; he was on the other side of the family. But I would go over there and like, so I'd see a picture of Spike. I'm like, that's Uncle Mike. But well,
Oh,
it's also beautiful how fucking gross Skate Country looks like. They didn't clean it for this. I mean, we were watching a VHS
yeah,
rip, which is on YouTube if you want to watch it, and he did not clean it. It looks moldy and dusty, and it's just awesome. It's just, if you ever want to know what was it like being 7 or 8 years old and being forced to go to a shitty birthday party in a dark room where you can't roller skate, that was it. That's pretty much exactly what it was like.
that's also
Only there wasn't a cute animated dog.
IMDb also, or somebody, maybe not IMDb, but somewhere in my looking this up, I saw that this is like the only Snoopy thing that has never been re-released because nobody likes it.
Yeah.
Very funny. And then the last thing that did make it sort of amusing to watch is that one of my observations in doing this, and it's just I don't have a deeper like point to make with this. It's just funny to me is that a lot of these crossover animations, on some level, are like this psychosexual desire to fuck a cartoon.
Yeah.
And
Uh, that,
in this one it's kind of the other way around, where Spike is clearly interested in the girl in the red truck. So there's just a little of that, and it's just mostly at the very beginning, because at the end he like just leaves sadly to
yeah.
wander the desert for some reason. But I did see that and think, wow, that's funny. That just falls right in place with some of these other movies.
It's a weird, it's almost like he's Peter Sellers in Being There, where people project onto him. So Jenny and her boyfriend, whose name I can't recall, nor do I care to, they sort of just talk out their problems at him while he's like eating milk bones or whatever.
Yeah, her boyfriend who looks like Dave Coulier off of Wish.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Like I really thought it was him. The voice wasn't annoying enough. So yeah. I would say that I wouldn't say the animation to I mean, considering they had a tiny budget, almost, like no time to do it and all that stuff, it looks like Peanuts characters interacting with human beings. The Peanuts animation has always been really simplistic, and the character styles are very simplistic, so I think it worked okay. They actually try some perspective shots, which is one of the harder things to do. They don't pull it off very well, but they gave it a shot. Whoever was animating it put some effort in.
I mean, it's
um
kind of like the short is too simple to really mess up. It's just like
yeah.
Snoopy or Spike is there. That's really the whole thing. Like they don't do
Mhm.
anything more technically audacious than that.
The music is super annoying. It's just doopy 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 shit the whole way, nonstop. Like it never stops. There's never any room to breathe because it's just whoever. It sounds like somebody were just recording and making it up as they go along on a fucking Casio. Yeah, and I have no idea what the moral of this is, because it's some sort of like anti-Hollywood lifestyle thing where he's brought her a chance to be in a movie, but she really just wants to continue teaching aerobics in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, and
She loves
and he
the
comes to
roller skate
understand.
rink too much. She doesn't want to.
Yeah, it's like I don't know. I don't understand. It's like the opposite of most of these stories, where like you know, it's like an it's like the opposite of Flashdance, where you have someone who has a kind of low laid dancing career that's trying to work their way up into like a major stardom, and they're like, this is the other way around, where they've been offered a chance for stardom, and they're like, nah, no thanks.
I can't. I don't want to work somewhere where I'm not breathing spores in.
Yeah, yeah. If I don't, if there's not a chance that I'll get valley fever and have an infection in my lungs, there's no point in any of this. If it's not 120 degrees during the month of July, what are we doing? Yeah, I get it. She lives near a lake. I have no idea where that lake is. They don't mention in the IMDb things. It must be pretty far out of town, and it must be man-made.
Yeah, because they had
But
there was green grass there.
yeah, it can't be. I don't know where the hell that was. Ugh. Yeah, this is a weird movie. Like, and also I just want to make it clear that like I don't have a lot of that much love for my old hometown, but I never knew anybody to go and get in a car with a bunch of guns and go on coyote hunts. I don't think that was a thing that happened even out in the boonies. I think that Charles and Monty Schultz just are like, I don't know, what do rednecks in Arizona do? They probably hunt coyotes, and that they'll think that that was actually the only really funny part to me is some of the animation with Spike holding up a sign saying "I am not a coyote"
Yeah.
and looking really frustrated at times. That was kind of funny to me. But I think those are the only laughs I got that weren't sort of ironic laughs. I feel bad for Jill Schultz because I don't think she's a terrible actress, but she got a lot of it was sort of a Godfather 3 situation.
Yeah, she seemed fine. And I think,
She got a lot of the bad reviews were directed at her instead of the fact that it was this dumb movie.
sheesh.
Anything else? We can move on.
No, I don't think so.
All right, so that's like the appetizer there. So then the next one is Volere Volare.
So this is the
Which
movie. This is the movie that made me want to do the podcast in the first place because I had this buried memory of being in a video store, Home Video Express, a movie store that was in my hometown that I rented a lot of stuff from. And I remember seeing this movie on the shelf at some point, and I all I could tell, all I had in my memory was that it was like R-rated Roger Rabbit.
yeah,
And I was trying to figure out what it was. So at some point a few months ago, I just asked on Twitter if anyone knew what it was, and somebody linked me to the IMDb for this movie, and I looked at the pictures and I was like, that's the one. So that was when I pitched the idea for this episode, and Gabe found it, and now that I've watched it, my most but the biggest revelation is the only thing that I remember from the box and from the pictures is that there's a sexy human woman, and this little animated guy,
yeah.
and that happens 1 hour and 15 minutes into this 90-minute movie.
It's funny because the video store I used to rent at as a kid had a poster for this, and I remember staring at the poster trying to figure out what the fuck was going on because it never played anywhere in Tucson. It just was sort of there one day. So I don't know. It's the we're gonna probably refer to it as "To Want to Fly." I don't know. Are you comfortable with Italian?
No, I'm not.
Volere
Yeah,
Volare.
To Want to Fly is definitely easier.
Yeah, this is 1991,
My
and
main.
this is
Oh, go ahead.
yep. I was gonna say it's directed, written by, and starring Maurizio Nichetti, and it is co-directed by the animation director Guido Manuli.
And you
And
said you told me that you just appreciated the fact that this is the only movie that we watched that credited both of them as the director.
right, as co-directors, it's not just like animation director kind of off somewhere in because everybody always calls it Bob Zemeckis' Roger Rabbit, and I don't know. I think it's a little disrespectful. I know that there were rules at the time until really recently. That's why all the Coen Brothers movies are only ever credited to Joel, because they weren't supposed to have two directors for some weird guild reason I've never really understood. I guess because it's Italian, they credit them both, which is funny because with all my Italian exploitation knowledge, they often just don't credit directors at all.
Well, that's one thing that's funny, and then the other thing that's funny is that, I mean, if we really are, if the idea was really to find a movie that's like 70-30, this movie definitely doesn't qualify. I would say 30 animation, 70 live action.
Yeah, I mean it's still I think it's good enough. I think that
It certainly
animation,
delivers on the premise that it's combining live action and animation. I would
yeah,
that's definitely true, but there's a lot less animation in this than you would think, and a lot more focus on sex work, which I actually found, for a movie, especially an older movie, pretty charmingly like nonchalant.
you can say it. You can say an older Italian movie on top of that.
I mean, no, I honestly, in this case, I would just worry about any movie.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking early 90s. Italians were making some pretty misogynistic comedies still well into the 90s. So I was afraid it was going to be that kind of thing. I was afraid it was going to be just googly eyeballed men looking at women's underwear when they lean over. But the funny part of the movie is actually the sex work stuff, which
Yeah,
I thought was kind of clever and funny.
That she did, and because she doesn't do traditional sex work, it's all these weird sort of obscure fetishy things that she just sort of participates in, and a lot of them aren't even that sexual. You know, there's like this couple that she keeps seeing that they want to pretend that like they're dying, and she's a nurse, and she's just sad for the fact that they're dying, or she carries their bodies to the ambulance or something. Or there's a guy who wants to foil a robbery in her hallway, or
Yeah.
there are the architects who just come over and she's like walking around doing her morning routine naked.
Yeah.
They just stare at her.
I made mustachioed twins that are architects. There's a guy. The one disturbing one is there's a guy who wants to be babied, and he speaks with an overdubbed child's voice.
Yes, and
I believe
I
that
think
a lot of
that's
these
like
movies were shot without sound still.
one of the earliest examples that I can think of seeing the baby fetish in a piece of media.
There's a man who photocopies her in her panties.
Yep. The most elaborate one is the chef who like pours chocolate all over the lower half of her naked body, and then like elaborately designs some sort of like pattern on it. And I thought that they were gonna like she would get out of it, and then it would be like the remaining piece would be like served to somebody or something. But they just don't show you what happens after he's done.
Yeah, that might have been too hard.
Probably.
That might.
Because the whole scene while he was doing it, I was thinking, how does this work? What happens to it? But because it didn't seem like it was going to have structural integrity once she got out of it. But
some of her things, what brings her and this other guy together, he is what is his job is he and his brother run a dubbing company, which was kind of fun, as you know, because a lot of these movies are shot without sound, and there's a line where all the people dubbing don't even speak the same language, all these girls, and they mostly dub. His brother dubs pornography and he dubs old cartoons, and so there's some really kind of cute little much, but this sort of it reminds me of Delicatessen, the Junot and Caro film, where there'll just be these little vignettes that are just sort of cute of someone just doing their thing. And so his thing is he doesn't have a lot of lines. Like, I don't know if he even speaks for like the first half hour or 40 minutes of the movie.
yeah, there's a whole opening sequence of him collecting sound effects, and he doesn't say anything. Like he goes into this store and he's testing all of this random stuff that the storekeepers have for him that makes noise. And I don't think I don't think he says anything until like he's about to leave. He tells them which of the items to wrap up, and I think that's like his only line in the whole like 5-minute sequence.
And then later he and her end up accidentally in the same cab, but it turns out that the cab driver is actually one of her clients who just wants to drive crazy with people in the car.
She does run into him like a couple of times before.
That's right.
And he makes a trumpet sound, so she calls him Trumpet the whole movie.
That's right. She calls him Trumpet, and yeah, he's basically Harpo Marx to her at the beginning.
Will require a little bit of suspension of disbelief in the sense that I don't think that you have to dub an entire cartoon with every sound in one go.
In one go, yeah.
I think you can do each sound effect one at a time, but that is the way he does it. And it is sort of fun just to see how the sound effects match up with the picture. But one of the big problems with the movie is that it feels like they took 3 10-minute sequences and they stretched each one to 30 minutes, and then they had 90 minutes of movie.
I think my favorite joke in the whole thing, well, the taxi driver thing is pretty funny, and the fact that he ends up stuck in the situation with the guy who thwarts the robbery.
Yeah.
But she gets spaghetti spilled on her when they go out on a date. And instead of going like, oh my God, well, how embarrassing, she has to tell the chef, it's not Wednesday. I'm not here for this right now. It's a really good joke that everywhere this woman goes, she has clients who see her and go, oh, cool, I get to enact my weird fetish right now. And it's actually ruining her day because it's not time for it right now. And then the plot kind of goes forward because the taxi driver and the old couple like having him around, so she's trying to get the sort of meet cuteness of it. The romantic side is she's trying to get back with him, less in a romantic sense and more in a she needs someone to help her on these jobs so that she can make more money on them.
I do think
So
that maybe some of the plot might be a little bit lost in translation because
it's
we're
possible.
dealing with burned in subtitles from the
Yeah.
1990s, from like a Laserdisc rip, and because she does seem to go sort of back and forth because the movie does open where she's like kind of looking for someone to actually be with in addition to her work. But yeah, then and she does seem to kind of like him a little bit, but
Yeah.
it's all sort of it's not very well plotted.
They are cute together. The romance side of it doesn't exactly come through. There's a whole thing on the Wikipedia about how this actress was known for kind of playing really over the top comedic characters, and that the actor director was like really determined to make her like be nude and sexualized and super sexy, and it was just like that was his thing. I don't know if I consider that a good thing, but it was kind of interesting, and I was trying to think of what would a Hollywood equivalent to that be, and I really couldn't come up with anything, but like an actress who's known for being goofy, like hag like characters that we suddenly get to see as sexy in a movie, and I honestly could not think of anyone. I Every time I thought, like, I'm like Anna Faris, I'm like, no, that's stupid. Anna Faris is her whole bit is that she is sexy. Like that doesn't make sense. So I couldn't connect that to something.
No, I can't. I can't. Not off the top of my head, anyway.
I have a note here saying the rest of the movies verify that Roger Rabbit really appeals to perverts.
Yeah, because you know, like after all that, the movie just sort of ends. Like it
Yep.
doesn't resolve anything. He turns into a cartoon for reasons that are sort of vague. Like
Yeah.
the cartoons,
He
the introduction of the cartoons is just sort of weird. Like they just start like popping out of his pockets and stuff, and sort of fall.
What happens is he walks in front of the screen while it is projecting, and the duck cartoon, they go into it as pocket,
Mhm.
and then they come back out of his pocket later, and I think that's kind of neat. It's kind of like the Lion the Witch, the wardrobe from the Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe. 4 cartoons is his pocket, but that's not really what they stick with. And I think the idea is that his emotional state is making him become a cartoon
Mm.
or some. Yeah, but it's sort of like he gets infected by the cartoons that go in his pocket. And there's some they're not particularly funny gags, but I wanted to be more funny with his hands, like there's a little bit of body horror in it. Honestly,
Yeah,
the idea of turning into a cartoon is sort of disturbing because it happens piece by piece, and he peels off his skin to reveal it.
and it's just like it just feels like if this happened halfway into the movie or at the beginning of the movie, then the movie would
Yeah,
have a lot more places to go. But it doesn't. It just takes so long to get there, and then a lot of what happens after is him just trying to leave, like just trying to because he's embarrassed by it, so he's trying to
right.
like hide from her and stuff. And
It's a little like a comedic werewolf movie where he's becoming a werewolf and trying to get away from so he doesn't get found out.
mhm. But that's what she wants.
Apparently, yeah. I mean, she has no problem with it. As soon as she sees him, it's like, okay, cool. Like, and I also have a note here. I think this would make, if it was a little better, I think I actually ended up liking it more than you, just because I found the sex worker stuff genuinely kind of funny and cute. It just didn't really work as a animated,
No,
crossover
I mean,
movie.
I did like that stuff. It's just that no matter what the movie does, it just seems like it does it for too long, and then it becomes a little
Yeah,
tedious because you're just waiting for something different to happen, as opposed to the movie just continuing to show you more variants on the same thing. Um, it can come up with all these sex worker ideas that it wants, but what I liked was when it moved into the next part and it was like intermingling the way he was reacting to it versus the way she was interacting with it,
yeah.
and that too ends up going on for too long, and then it gets hung up on something else, and so on and so forth. And really,
Um,
it's like the thing that would make it work a lot better is like if somehow her like it's sort of unclear what her problem is and it's sort of unclear what his problem is, and so when they solve it by getting together at the end, it doesn't really mean anything. You're like,
mhm.
okay, they like each other, that's the end of the
Yeah.
movie.
I looked at Nichetti wrote and directed and starred in a lot of movies. I guess he was a sort of Roberto Benigni like guy for a while there, and some of them are award winners. I've definitely heard of The Icicle Thief, which came out the year after this and seems to also have a sort of movie within a movie aspect to it, or at least like a meta aspect to it. But I had not heard of any of his other movies. He won awards and made lots of money, so he was obviously very popular at the time.
Were you going to say that you thought that this would go with something?
Oh yeah, yeah. So if it was better, I think this would go with Peter Strickland's Berberian Sound Studio, which is about a dub artist in Italy who loses his metaphysical mind while on the job of dubbing a horror movie that he doesn't understand. I don't. Did you ever see Berberian?
No, I wanted to. I've seen I've seen Strickland's other movies, but that's the.
Yeah, it's kind of a similar thing where they're both about dub artists in Italy losing their minds, but one's whimsical and the other one's horrifying. Also, I also noted I hated the background music in this one too. It sounds like the background music for a Nintendo 64 game, basically. It was no good. The cinematography is nice though. It's something that it actually does better than the Hollywood movies we're going to talk about, which it makes things look just cartoony enough when the cartoons aren't involved, just by color choices. And I imagine if we were watching a decent Blu-ray version, it would have been more impressive.
Mm-hmm.
We were watching a pretty pale, darkened,
low res.
it was on top of everything else. It was also really had a lot of film grain and stuff on it too. So I could see it being a better movie with a better transfer, but it doesn't seem like, I don't know. There's a rights issue, and I couldn't even find a foreign release of it. But this one needed
My only other
subtitles.
note that I thought was funny is that almost every Italian man in the movie looks exactly the same. Which
Yeah.
I didn't. That felt like some sort of weird commentary where they're all these slightly balding guys with wild hair and glasses and mustaches, and they all just kind of look the same. And I just thought
Yeah.
that was amusing.
I guess the brother looks a little different, to the point where I didn't get that they were brothers because they didn't look the same. But yeah, for the most part, it's just a bunch of bushy men. Maybe that was really popular in 90s, and I don't know what popular fashions were, because I only watch like horror movies and they're from that era, and so everybody's dressed like 80s slasher movies in those, so I don't know what's actually popular.
Right.
Yeah, so it was an interesting movie, and it was, I was expecting it to be, Roberto Benigni level annoyance, and I found it somewhat charming. But the thing you mentioned about it being sort of like pieces that are just sort of crammed into a feature length, that's pretty much an issue for every single one of these movies, is what I noticed. And I
Yeah.
guess
It feels like because I think that largely stems from what I was talking about with Roger Rabbit, which is that Roger Rabbit has a premise that lends itself to doing this,
Mhm.
and so many of these other movies, it doesn't really feel like they came up with a strong enough premise. So without a real impetus for like why are we combining live action and cartoons, without that going for it, then it feels more like an affectation, like something that should that is more fitted toward a short film or music video just to show off the fact that you can do it.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge Robert Zemeckis fan, but I know that he understands narrative structures and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think having someone of his caliber, and someone like Spielberg working on production too, I think that there were people involved that knew that this needed to be a movie and not just a magic trick.
Mm-hmm.
And that will bring us to uh, Cool World from 1992.
You said you took a lot of notes, and
Yeah, this one might end up being the longest one we talk about.
I also took a lot of notes because Cool World is just, I had seen Cool World a long, long time ago. I remember it. I remembered not liking it, but yet for some reason, when we hit on the idea of this podcast and we started talking about it, I something about it. I just got excited to see Cool World again, and boy was I wrong, because I liked it even less than I remember liking it before. It is a disaster.
I hadn't seen it since 1992 when it came out on home video, and it was hard to get my mom to rent it because I was still 12 and it was rated PG-13, and she took that very seriously.
Yeah,
And I remember convincing her to rent it, and there be in the sex scene, which has no nudity or thrusting or gyrating or anything, she made me leave the room.
Uh, very similar things happened to me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Not with this
Um,
movie, but with something even more embarrassing, which is Pauly Shore's "In the Army Now."
I don't know if I saw it in the army. I definitely saw the Pauly Shore farmer movie,
Son-in-law.
Son-in-Law, and there's a strip scene in that one
See
with
well, what's really embarrassing about "In the Army Now" is it wasn't even a sex scene. The movie's rated PG. It's not even rated PG-13. But like he lives somewhere, and his girlfriend comes over to visit, and she is fully clothed, and he is almost fully clothed. He's got his shirt off, and he's like kissing her on the neck. And my mom walked into the room at that exact moment. And even though by the time she registered what was happening and was getting mad about it, even though by that time the phone was ringing and he was answering the phone, he was clearly going to leave and the scene was going to cut to something else. She made me turn it off and take it back to the video store.
so funny because I only when if I rented a movie until I was about 14 and I could like just ride my bike and I had enough money from allowance, I just watched it with my mom or dad or both. Unless I was at a birthday party or something or like a sleepover, I just watched all the movies with my parents because I didn't have any siblings. So I guess they were always in the room. So anytime we watched something embarrassing, I'd usually excuse myself just so I didn't have to be there. uh, anyway, this is directed by Ralph Bakshi, and I need to give from the few people listening to the podcast who don't really know, I don't have the time to sum up the monumental career of Ralph Bakshi. So this is the short version that I've kind of put together. He worked his way up from cell polisher to animation director at Terry Toons, which is the sort of Z grade studio behind Mighty Mouse. That like if you didn't get Disney, you didn't get Warner Brothers, you didn't get about a dozen other things. You got Terry Toons at the very bottom of the barrel, and he ended up at Paramount, and then he struck out on his own and he started Backseat Productions in 1968. And most people remember him for making adult cartoons commercially viable in America. And he became a sort of counterculture figure because of this. And I don't know how much of him is actually counterculture and how much of him is just he has weird sense of humor and perversions. But the thing that is really interesting to me is that he got a whole slate of movies made against the odds through just sheer tenacity and stubbornness and in creative drive. And he built his whole career off his directorial debut, which was Fritz the Cat, known for being the first X-rated cartoon. Pretty sure it's been re-rated R because it's just not that shocking. And it was made with a producer named Steve Kratz, and Krantz was kind of instrumental in all this. And it was based on Underground Comic by R. Crumb, who sued it because he sued production because he fucking hated it. But anyway, it was a big surprise hit. And even though plenty of his other movies made some money, most of them were not hits. So it was kind of like without like looking up exactly what into his career, it was sort of like he just sort of through sheer force of will would just convince studios, hey, I'm the guy who made Fritz the Cat, I have this other idea, give me some money.
I mean, he did make a name for himself on the Lord of the Rings animated, even though I don't know if that was a hit, but people certainly remember it.
Well, that's the thing is that if you actually watch Lord of the Rings, well, okay, so he did Heavy Traffic and Coonskin, which are kind of hard to watch in retrospective, but those are adult cartoons with like adult themes, nudity, bad words, a lot of racial stereotypes. And then
Well,
he
to
did
be fair, the Coonskin is about that, so it's
right.
not just like it's a
Coonskin is
movie.
okayed by the NAACP. Actually, they have an official thing where they said this is fine. This is making a point. But it's adult. It's not something you would show kids.
Sure.
And then he made some roughly family friendly fantasy movies in Wizards, which is a very strange movie, and Lord of the Rings and Fire and Ice, which is probably his most successful complete version of this fantasy thing he wanted to do based on Frank Frazetta paintings. But the Lord of the Rings was kind of famous because it was the case of him just running out of money, and it was supposed to be this big thing that encompassed all three books. And you can, if you watch that movie, you can see them losing more and more and more and more budget, to the point where at some point some of the orcs are just they aren't even really rotoscoping the actors anymore. They're just flat out xeroxing them really heavily, so they're just black shapes. And then they just end it at the end of the Two Towers. So I think he was sort of famous for over for being overly ambitious and sort of not completing things at a certain point.
The one thing that I will say, probably the main reason that I was excited to check this out again, even though I remembered not liking it, is because one of the movies that he made, maybe right before, or I think there must have been something after it in the middle, but one of the movies that he made close to it was American Pop, which I think is a masterpiece. I love American Pop.
I think that's like a jukebox kind of musical, and I think that's his best movie.
Yeah.
I think that is his best movie, and Fire and Ice is his other sort of complete movie,
Mhm.
where a lot of the other ones are sort of hodgepodges, uh, for lack of a better word. Yeah, and he also made Hey Good Looking, which is the one I have not seen.
Yeah, I haven't.
And it's
I haven't.
I've gone out of my way to see all these, and I don't even know if I like any of them. But I think that says something about him as an artist, as I find him really interesting. He goes out of fashion because adult cartoons become, because first of all, Lord of the Rings loses money, but adult animation sort of went out of fashion in the 80s. So you have Disney and Don Bluth, and that's almost it. And things that are trying to be Disney or Don Bluth as far as theatrical animation. He disappears for almost a decade, and then Roger Rabbit comes out, and he sees the possibility of making another movie. And it seems to me that he was already working at Paramount doing the Adventures of Mighty Mouse, New Adventures of Mighty Mouse. So he was, kind of busy. He wouldn't have been a huge gamble. And I'm thinking that he comes to the studio with, I have this idea, and the studio says, cool, we want that Roger Rabbit money, and we know you as the adult animation guy.
Well, I can answer some of those questions because
Okay.
I to watch this movie again. I got the Shout Factory Blu-ray, and
Yeah.
there's a half an hour new documentary on it with
Okay.
new interviews with Bakshi, Basinger, and the producer Frank Mancuso Jr. And I think that's really what happened, is that he went to Frank Mancuso Jr., who he was sort of friends with, and Frank Mancuso Jr. is the son of the guy who was running the studio, Frank Mancuso Sr.
Senior, yeah.
So he had an in with somebody who was important. But one of the main things that happened was the thing that he pitched was he pitched a movie where a human has sex with a coon and it produces a hybrid baby, and it was supposed
Yeah.
to be an animated horror movie, basically.
Yeah.
And then Kim Basinger signed on, and she didn't want to do that. She like the thing that she liked was this character, a Hollywood, and the movie just sort of started like mutating into something else. And basically, I mean, what Bakshi says in the new documentary is it's like he doesn't blame anyone else because he agreed to all of it, but it sort of got away from him, and over time, like what he was doing, he lost focus on. There's also a great. They don't go over in the documentary, but there was also a great piece of IMDb trivia that I read where, like somewhere in the middle of production, Kim Basinger just said offhandedly that she was looking forward to like something that she could bring to children's hospitals and show them.
Yep.
And Bakshi was like, "Oh my God, why didn't you tell me this sooner? Like, that's great, but why did you hire me? I'm not gonna give you that."
Yeah. Yeah. Because for all its faults, this is basically, well, I think the big problem, which I'm guessing they went into in the documentary, is at some point the things I read said that Mancuso Jr. decided it needed to be PG,
That's part of
and
it, yeah.
there's like rumors that he got like strangled by Bakshi, which Bakshi denied. But I think that that's ultimately, above everything else, the biggest problem in the whole movie is that it needs to be rated R. It at least needs to be so violent and perverted and obscene that it sort of like justifies its existence. But by being PG-13, and a really hard PG-13 in some points, and a really kind of icky vibe that a lot of Bakshi's movies have, especially the sort of street figures. I should quickly describe the plot, actually. The
Well,
idea, for
yeah.
people who haven't seen this.
Just as a preface, as you get into this, I'm not going to deny that is one of the problems with this movie. But I
Okay.
would also say that this movie has a lot of problems. Like
Yes.
it's very hard to narrow it down to just one thing.
No, I think my thing here, which I really should be wrapping this up with, but I'll say here, is that I think that this is a movie that doesn't work, but that I think people would have liked it more if it was at least really dirty. And I think that that's like
probably
the assessment you give a lot of cult films. Like, this was no good, but man, there were a lot of breasts in there. This was no good, but there was that really gory part where the guy's guts fell out.
I can agree with that.
Okay. God, again, Letterboxd. The Letterboxd thing says a bizarre accident lands Frank Harris, who's played by Gabriel Byrne, in Cool World, a realm of cartoons. Years later, cartoonist Jack Deebs, who's been drawing Cool World comics, crosses over as well. He sets his lustful sights on an animated femme fatale Hollywood, and that's Kim Basinger. I'm sorry, Frank Harris is Brad Pitt. My bad. And Jack Deebs is Gabriel Byrne. But she's got plans of her own to become real. And so that's not saying how fucking weird the things that happen and like the things we're supposed to just take for granted in this movie are. The main thing story-wise is that this absolutely like if you see a poster for this, even when it was first released, you would assume Brad Pitt was the main character.
Yeah.
Gabriel Byrne is nowhere on the poster art. He's nowhere on the DVD art. He's nowhere on, if you go to stream it on Vudu or Fandango, he's nowhere on that either. It's all Brad Pitt. And that's because Brad Pitt had just become a movie star and Gabriel Byrne, was never that big of a movie star. So, I mean, it makes sense. But there's also no reason for Brad Pitt not to be the main character as far as I'm concerned. It should really be the movie. The whole beginning is told from his point of view.
Yes, the movie spends a lot of time explaining where Brad Pitt's character comes from, but not any of his choices. And then that's not the guy that we're following.
And then they really don't explain how Gabriel Byrne's character fits in. And
there's literally one throwaway line where it's implied that maybe he killed his wife.
Oh no, it's so good. It's so good. The movie begins with him in prison, and there's literally no reason for it. He's come out of prison, and while he's signing comic books, which is something weird about this movie. I think it's supposed to be a comic book, not cartoon. I think that at some point somebody said, well, we need it to be more like Roger Rabbit, so they need to be cartoons. But they call them doodles, and everything he does is a comic book. And like it anyway. He just comes in and out of this thing. And yeah, while he's signing autographs, one really rude person says, yeah, I gotta kill people. I could kill that guy you caught in bed with your wife. And that's the only mention of it. It never comes up again. And I assume there was like a million rewrites on this. I assume at some point they were going to dig into what that was, and he was going to like he was going to find the real killer. That was my assumption.
Yeah. Okay. That would be a thing. Yes.
And then it just got lost. But they had already shot the stuff in the prison, and it probably cost money, so they didn't want to do away with it. But there's zero reason for it. And then there's this whole unexplained thing where he thinks he's created Cool World, but no, we know it's been around since the 40s because Brad Pitt's character was sucked into it by accident. They explain how Brad Pitt's character was a mad scientist in Cool World, opened up the portal right as Brad Pitt's character was in a terrible emotional state because he's been in a motorcycle accident and his mother has died. And he has major PTSD from being in World War II. He's just gotten home from World War II. And it's something to do with a mix of his emotional state and this thing that's supposed to open another portal. But then he ends up the only human regularly living there. They imply other humans come through sometimes. But he's living here and he decides to never go back, even though he has the power to go back whenever he wants. And he's been living there for 50 years and not aged.
Well, yeah, it's like, okay, so first of all, he goes to Cool World. He's in a terrible emotional state. But what about Cool World takes like why does Cool World appeal to him in a way that takes his mind off of this tragedy? The movie ends up coming up with this premise where if Holly leaves Cool World, it's going to be disastrous for the real world if she gets
Yeah.
into the real world. But why does that happen if Brad Pitt can just hang out in Cool World forever? Like,
Yeah.
there's no explanation for that. Holly has this desire to leave Cool World, but when she leaves it and comes to the real world starts like turning into Cool World. So it's like, what is the appeal of leaving? Like, she seems to be only partially fazed by this happening. And she
Yeah.
doesn't seem to mind it when she's in the real world and she turns back into a cartoon. So there's all these little things that are just so incoherent that don't add up to anything. They don't make any sense.
I mean, maybe at some point more of the movie was about her and Gabriel Byrne being in the real world and her not being a fish out of water, not understanding things and realizing. I assume that there is a version of this script where the moral is that Holly realizes the real world sucks and that she wants to be a cartoon again. But that's not what happens in the movie. She's like a real femme fatale in that she has only bad intentions for everybody and is like exceedingly selfish person. Like, it's very strange that to me that Basinger wanted to play this character so bad.
And she's still like in that documentary I watched. She's still like really. She seems proud of the movie.
Yeah,
Kind of
I
crazy.
mean, I don't get it, but I think she's actually kind of bad in it, and I think Gabriel Byrne is awful in it. I think that
See, I,
he's like drugged. He's like a drugged dog.
it's definitely Gabriel Byrne is definitely really terrible. Like, he just doesn't know what he's doing. Like,
Yeah,
I wouldn't blame it on him. It just seems like
no,
it's very obvious to me that you look at him and he's like, I only kind of know what I'm doing, so I'm gonna go for it, but I don't really have a grip on it, so I can only be so gung ho about it. And he just looks lost like half the time, and
yep,
like he's clearly drowning under the special effects. Basinger is within the parameters of what the movie is asking you to do. She does a good job of delivering on that. I think that she has some notion, at least some idea of a tone that she is consistent with. But even
yeah, I
though
suppose.
even though she does seem like she's probably 10 years too old to be playing the character the way she plays it. But
Yeah,
I did like the one period of the movie where she's especially good and it's not too incoherent is the little bit after she sleeps with Gabriel Byrne and turns into a human being, but she's still in Cool World. And she's sort of like taunting the other cartoons that she's going to leave. Like, that's the one part where it's kind of like, I get what she's doing and it doesn't seem weird. And then she goes out into the real world and the way she's behaving seems completely bonkers.
yeah. I mean, that's something I guess we should make sure is clear is that the way you become a human is have sex with a human
Which is
as a
which is
cartoon.
all Brad Pitt's job as for some reason, his job as a human cop in animated Cool World is to stop this from happening.
He's just a professional cock blocker.
Yeah.
it's it's the only thing he does.
And for no reason. There's no explanation as to why he was assigned this job, because Gabriel Byrne will be the first person that seems to have been in Cool World other than Brad Pitt in all this time. So, like, what was he doing for the other 40 years between...
I guess shooting people
Yeah,
every time they showed up.
uh, yeah, and then there's also... you mentioned that there's a scientist who creates a rip that gets him in, but for some reason there's also a spike on top of a Las Vegas hotel that if you pull it out, all the cartoons will just escape.
The spike makes no sense because they act like it's been a plot point the whole time.
Yeah.
Like they act like it's Chekhov's spike, but like it's just sort of announced an hour plus into the movie that there's a spike.
Also,
I think maybe
just to add another thing that breaks the movie's own rules is speaking of arbitrary things that they just reveal at the end that have to do with the spike. It seems like, if I'm not totally mistaken, that the scientist guy who creates the rip has been in reality for the entire time that Brad Pitt's been in the cartoon.
50 some years, yeah.
So why does he not break the world, but Hollywood does.
Well, and yeah, Brad Pitt implies that like if you sleep with a human and a doodle sleep together, I can't. What did they call
Noid,
humans?
noids.
Noid. If a noid and a doodle sleep together, it will like destroy the space time continuum. But that's not true. You if a human and a doodle sleep together, they end up hybrids. It's sort of what happens because then Gabriel Byrne has like I, I'm sure it's supposed to be an STD metaphor where he starts turning into a cartoon. And God, he turns into a really. I remember actually as a kid being really disappointed that he became an annoying Superman guy instead of a cool guy. But it works. It works better for the character because the character's a worthless person.
Yeah, there's actually
And
just to. I mean, I know this whole section of describing the story as a mess, but that's what you get when you have a story that is a mess. Apparently, I think on the box copy it actually says that the creation of Hollywood, even though he doesn't actually create her because apparently she
mhm,
existed, is the thing that got him through his prison sentence. There's none of that is in the movie.
nothing. Like he's got a nice for someone who is apparently doing time for murder. It must have been a manslaughter charge because he's clearly not doing a lot of time, and they've given him like his full artist's easel and pens and pencils, like all those sorts of sharp implements.
And he's allowed to
Uh,
send his comics outside
yeah,
that he's signed because the store that he goes to has signed copies signed from prison being
yeah,
advertised on the wall.
yeah. Which the what's it called law had definitely been passed before then, where you can't. Well, was it named after Gacy? I don't remember. Some serial killer who was making money off his shit. Uh, they passed a law where you can't do that.
And then on top of all this, like another thing that just occurs to me is that they never tell you what the comic book is about. Like they never explain it.
No,
Like it's just covers, and they have Hollywood on
yeah,
them, and that's all you ever find out about them. Like this clerk lady is enthusing about the comic, but she doesn't have anything to say about it because the comic has there's no concept of what the comic actually is.
and it is kind of. I do kind of like the implication that like Roger Rabbit has this whole implication that we should that tunes and humans should coexist and that's better for everybody, whereas this is like if cartoons come into our universe, it will be the end of the world. It will just be the worst thing ever and it will all be horrible. There's no nice cartoon. There's one nice cartoon, basically two. There's the spider guy who's voiced by the Mr. Big Head actor, who's Brad Pitt's partner, and then there's Brad Pitt's girlfriend, which is something that really could have been interesting in a better movie. That he has this woman he loves who's animated, and he can't sleep with her because he has this belief that it will destroy reality if they have sex. So they have this really pained relationship with each other.
And not to keep harping on the plot thing, but the spider guy that you mentioned, he gets sucked into Gabriel Byrne's pen for some reason because the pen has some sort of power inside Cool World that is never very clearly defined.
Yeah, yeah. Brad Pitt just says this is a deadly weapon here. That's all. That's all we get.
He does it basically it's a long road to a dick joke, but then the movie keeps using it beyond that.
I'm gonna harp on the animation now. So apparently, Bakshi told animators just to do whatever they wanted, as far as if it wasn't plot related, they could just do whatever they wanted as long as it was funny. And I will say that this sort of anarchic, just shit happening on screen thing does fit with Heavy Traffic and Coonskin for sure. But those movies are like designed to be anarchic, like Tex Avery on coke, and this is a movie you're expected to follow, and so it just feels like there's shit jumping up in your view every 5 seconds and getting in the way, but it doesn't. They don't even like say words. Like I don't feel like they gave any support. Like there was like 6 animated characters that have actual lines and all the other ones just make noises at each other.
Yeah, they're not even really doing like clear comic bits like that. At least
No.
if you could tell what the gag was, then that might be kind of funny. But they're just sort of annoying, obnoxious. And when you say the thing that really stands out to me is you say "get in the way," which is literally true. The blocking of this movie is just atrocious. Like
Yeah.
so much of these little background characters are just in front of the thing that you're supposed to be looking at. Like
Yeah.
literally, obscuring it from your view. And one of the only things that I did remember about this movie, and it was exactly as I remembered, is this shot of Gabriel Byrne, and he's looking at Holly, and he lifts his hand up to put his hand on her cheek. And he just clearly expects, from the way that the shot is composed, that the animators are going to place Hollywood's cheek in his hand, and they just don't. She's like 3 inches away. He's just holding his hand in the air for no reason. And you're just like, what is anybody thinking? Was the animation completed before the live action? Why did these departments not communicate with each other in any way?
I think that the editing is shockingly bad in a couple spots too. There's one bit where Brad Pitt says something to the spider and he goes to crawl through a hole in the wall that's been made.
Mm-hmm.
And then he finishes his line, pauses, and crawls back out of the hole, and then they cut. I'm positive that he thought, that's the end of my line, they're going to cut here. And for some reason, the editor didn't notice that he was crawling back out of the wall, and there's this silent bit. And a similar thing happens later, where, well, she's still a cartoon, or no, she's turned back into a cartoon, and Holly has a line, and then there's just this really long pause. And it's just like did they not like make notes that like this is obviously the end of the scene? Like, what is going on? It's so strange. And but then the other note I have, well, I have a lot more notes. I'm going to try to get rid of some of them, but the climax is basically most modern superhero movies where some sort of blue laser threatens to end the world by bringing some other world into it. From a building, like it's the end of Avengers,
Yeah.
but instead of bringing in Thanos's hordes, it's bringing in cartoons. I think that Ninja Turtles ended with one of those, and like there's a whole bunch of superhero movies that end with that kind of thing. I don't know why, but I will say there are some things I like about the art direction.
That's what I was going to say. The two things that stand out to me are, even though Bakshi doesn't shoot it properly, they have this conceit where they're going to use like planes of space that are created out of flat pieces of production design that have like great animated or great art painted on them. And if he shot it correctly, it would look really cool. It would evoke a cartoon while also being an actual piece of live action footage. The way, one thing would be farthest in the background, and then there would be something closer, and the characters could potentially walk between them. And that would be interesting. He does it in the most incomprehensible way, like right from the start. When we cut to the present day, but we're in Cool World, Brad Pitt pulls up in like a fully animated car, and then the animation just goes away and like you can see it go away, and then there's this two-dimensional car, and it's like you don't really know what to make of that. And then he gets out of the car and he walks around it, and it cuts to another angle, and it's a different two-dimensional piece, but it's just so obvious that it's like you're looking at a thing that's on a stage.
It's like a standee, basically.
It's too obvious, so the effect doesn't work, but you can sort of get what they were kind of thinking. So that's kind of interesting. And then the movie keeps transitioning using these really amazing painted backgrounds that feel very like in the documentary. I should have written down who he credited, but
Barry E. Jackson did all these amazing cityscapes that are just the coolest fucking thing in the world. Oh my god, the cityscapes!
Yeah, the cityscapes just look great, and every time you look at any of these cityscapes, you're like, man, that is fantastic. Especially on this Shout Factory Blu-ray, which is a 4K remaster, and they look fantastic. They're so detailed and dimensional, and they have such personality, and you just wish the rest of the movie were anything as good as those images.
I mean, it's the one thing in the movie where I could imagine this being cool in the theater.
Yeah,
where looking up at those would be great. Nothing else that happens in this movie would be cool in a theater. Yeah, Barry E. Jackson. I had to find it. I didn't have the documentary, but I found his Instagram.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I think that the thing that they were going for, for me, it's sort of interesting. It's like a lot of things in the movie, like what you're describing, how it's very clearly suddenly 2D from a different angle, and it looks like a stage set. It does sort of have this avant-garde appeal to me, but I don't think that's what they were going for. I don't think this was supposed to be that level of experimental. I think it was supposed to be an optical illusion, like you're saying, but it was kind of neat to look at. I kind of liked it. Uh, but the animation itself is weird because they don't shade. I was really surprised. I remembered it being shaded, but they're pretty much straight, flat, single color. They don't do a shading pass, which is like a defining aspect of Roger Rabbit. And even the girl in the red truck does shading on the edges to make Spike look a little more three-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
So they feel like they were really, really going all in on the 2D-ness of it, which is another thing that makes me think it was supposed to be a living comic book and not a living animated picture. But I mean, this was made for nearly $30 million back when that was a decent budget. So I don't know where all the money went. Maybe Basinger was 10 million on her own. I don't know.
Probably some of the budget probably also went to, well, what would have been a different budget, but they famously erected a giant statue, like a giant cutout of
Yeah.
wood on the Hollywood sign, and people got mad.
Yeah, people did not like it. I read that too.
Um,
I don't I don't remember that from the time. Like, I'm sure it was on Entertainment Tonight or whatever.
Although she mentioned it in the documentary as being a great honor, and even Mancuso seemed to think that like they had achieved something because that happened. I suppose
Yeah.
The Hollywood sign is legendary, so
Yeah, you're not allowed to do stuff to it most of the time. So
even if you
um,
defaced it, you did something.
I also think that there was a little bit in this movie was trying not to just do Roger Rabbit, but also trying. I feel like the Holly character is a little bit Jessica Rabbit, but also a little bit Breathless Mahoney from Dick Tracy.
Mm.
I feel like she's doing a bit of a Madonna as Breathless Mahoney,
Certainly
and it just
Madonna.
made me think.
I think she's probably just going for Madonna the person.
Yeah, and maybe yeah, and then I'm just thinking of Breathless Mahoney, but I mean, it made me realize that I don't really think Dick Tracy's a great movie, but the production design in that movie, it really is spectacular. And the idea of bringing a comic book to life in a way you kind of wish they would have. All the live action footage is so bland in this. I guess yeah, you can say that Bakshi never shot live action, but that's not really true because for Lord of the Rings and Fire and Ice, he shot, and for American Pop, he shot extensive actors on sets to do rotoscoping.
Although, of
With
course, with American Pop, I haven't seen Fire and Ice or the other one, but yeah, when I watch American Pop, it's also like, even though he shot live action, he doesn't have to use all of the details of the live action. He can change the background. He can move the character
yeah,
where he wants to. So you can tell that there is a live action element, and that adds to it. But it's also like he does have the freedom to change it up using the animation. And yeah, so you talk about. In To Want to Fly, crediting both directors. Maybe what he really needed was a live action director to help him out.
yeah. I mean, I think it's. I don't think he's necessarily good with actors, which you can see in the performances, and I don't think he. I think he's good at blocking. I mean, Fire and Ice. If the behind the scenes of Fire and Ice, it's basically they shot the whole thing, and so that's part of what makes that movie look so interesting is that they are rotoscoping people from a point of view that you normally wouldn't draw a person from, and it makes it feel more real. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Just,
I think the same thing is true of American Pop.
yeah. And so there's like wraparound shots, like the big trailer moment in American Pop, where the camera wraps around the guy. That's just not something. That's something that you almost need the rotoscoping to pull off at that point in time before digital assistance. But yeah, I think you're right. I think having someone be on as at least a very good assistant director for all the live action stuff would have
Not just
probably helped.
and not just as a as an from an artistic standpoint, but also from a technical standpoint, because I think Bakshi's probably totally out of his element with the combining of live action and animation, which is why Gabriel Byrne just looks like he doesn't know what he's like.
Mhm.
Nobody, I mean, Brad Pitt too. Both of them have such
Yeah,
trouble interacting with animated characters.
Pitt's better, but he's also he knows, yeah, he knows more of what's expected from him, and he's actually decided on a character. I think him and Basinger have decided on a character, whereas Byrne wants someone to tell him who his character is, and there's no one there. I can't remember who it wasn't. Gabriel Byrne originally.
No, I
I
don't.
can't
I
remember.
don't know either.
It was not him. He came on a little late, so that probably made it worse.
I do know that when he was promoting, I was looking it up after the movie. When he was promoting Bullet Train, Brian Tyree Henry kept telling him, Brad Pitt, on the press tour, that he loved Cool World, and Brad Pitt is just like, that is a terrible movie.
Yeah. But another thing I like about this movie, and is the most 90s thing about it, is that it is full of fucking cool and incessant thoroughly 90s techno house and industrial music. Just, and it just does not mix. The score is by Mark Isham, and his score is this faux noir jazz thing, which sort of fits with the noir aesthetic. But then they'll just be like, I mean, there's My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, there's Ministry, there's Future Sound of London, there's the Thompson Twins, kind of the same thing.
And then don't
Um,
forget, we go to credits on David Bowie, which they talk about.
yeah, David Bowie song, a title song during the closing credits. It's a David Bowie song that everybody forgot.
Which is
Like,
crazy because, like they talk about it a little bit in the documentary. I was just amazed that Mancuso says they showed the movie to David Bowie and then he came back with a song. It's just like, what did David Bowie think of Cool World?
he was probably barely paying attention. Yeah, it's a strange song, and yeah, but I mean, I was a huge My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult fan by the time I was 13, so this might have been how I discovered. Oh yeah, there's that Ministry song NWO. There's that fucking cool and they just play that while they're going to the prison at the beginning of the movie. There's just like this like swooping shot to this awesome riff, and then they just don't play the rest of the song. It's so strange. They just use this one riff. Anyway, cool soundtrack. Brian Eno's on it too. That's pretty big. Early Moby song on there before he was Moby, that we all know and probably hate. I don't know if people still like Moby. Anyway, that's all I really got for this.
The Cool World is definitely like just not a good movie. No vibe, chaos all the time. It's just even worse than I remembered.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely something, if you don't spend money to see it, I think you like more than if you spent real world money to get the Blu-ray
Yeah,
disc.
especially
Anyway,
if you get wrapped in a whole customer service nightmare,
right,
which is what
that always helps.
which is what's happened to me. But
Yeah.
anyway,
So let's move on to maybe the more controversial one here. For a while, this is Faust, 1994. This is Jan Svankmajer, as I believe how you say it. I do not speak Czech very well, but I believe it's Svankmajer. Uh, we were gonna do Alice, which was his first movie from 1988, and things changed, and I sort of needed to do one of his movies. And in the end, I hadn't seen this one, and so by the end of things, Tyler doesn't think that they really technically interact. That they are two. That the animation and live action are technically separate elements.
yeah, because
And I have,
it's mostly like there's a human character and things are happening to him, and he'll look at something and we'll get a reverse shot, and the reverse shot will be an elaborate animation, and then it'll cut back to him, and he's just a normal live action human. And
I guess,
every once in a while, he might be a little bit involved with the animation. Like animation will happen on him, but
yes.
it's not. It's still not really like. I mean, if the impetus or the idea here was Roger Rabbit, then that's not really what this is.
And so the only argument I would make is that when I was thinking of this, I was thinking that animation over a live action background counted. But that's a little different when you're doing stop motion versus cell animation, because what you're doing is you have a live action background automatically whenever you're doing stop motion because it's a physical object. So that didn't really occur to me at the time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I
Um,
will say that I don't regret watching the movie because it's
yeah.
interesting. I've always been a big fan of the French director Michel Gondry, and you can certainly
Hmm.
see a lot of Gondry in this stuff. Like you can tell that he was influenced by this guy, whose name I'm not even going to try to say unless.
Well, yeah, I did. When we were doing Alice, I did a little more. That one was easier to research because it was kind of a big thing. So just sort of to. I'm not going to describe the plot here because the plot is sort of the play Faust, but it's actually taken from two different plays of Faust, and the plot is sort of a guy of what little plot there is a guy sort of in a, they use the word Kafkaesque to describe it, which is one of those terms that I couldn't define for you, but I know what it is when I see it. But I think the Kafkaesque idea is that he's sort of being forced to go through the he's forced into a play within his world.
Mhm.
Then he has to go through the play Faust. He has to be Faust, but that's really only part of it. But anyway, I have a book called Forbidden Animation by Carl F. Conan. It was published in 1997. He goes into Svankmajer was a Czech filmmaker, as we said, and he was an artist, and he was working before the fall of the Soviet Union, and he was a particularly controversial figure for quote militant surrealism, which is something you got to. I mean, we're both left wing people here, but man, the Soviets really struggled with things that bothered them, and so he was
Just loves militant in relation to
surrealism
realism, just like he's going into people's houses and making their lives more.
and like putting jam on the wall. Yeah, um, yeah, he's not a Dadaist. But he was part of the Prague Surrealist Manifesto of 1934, and his work was deemed too pessimistic and individualistic. I don't understand the individualistic part. I understand where they're getting pessimism from. I've seen 3 of his movies now, but like I've never understood why the Soviets had such a problem with pessimism. It's definitely something that comes up in a lot of discussion of Polish and Czechoslovakian art filmmakers. But anyway,
I mean, maybe they just meant that you could watch any of his movies and tell that it was him.
yeah.
In,
Well, yeah, that's the individualist
yeah.
part. I get that, but just it being too pessimistic, like we're not allowed to be pessimistic. Like, isn't like the most famous piece of Soviet literature, "A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich," I believe is what it's called, which is fucking depressing. Maybe that was not Soviet. Maybe that was written by someone who had left, and I'm just misunderstanding.
Hmm.
But anyway, his breakthrough film was a short called Dimensions of Dialogue, which won a Golden Bear at the Berlin Film Festival, which is a pretty big deal. And this prompted the Czech government to demand the film be returned to him because they were going to destroy it. And the Germans just said no. And so the Czechs said, fine, he's blacklisted. So he was blacklisted a second time. And he was then introduced to the brothers Quay, who animation fans might know
Right.
as really famous. Basically, when you're thinking of those Tool music videos like Sober and Prison Sex, that's someone ripping off the brothers Quay.
Chris.
And the brothers Quay are super duper inspired by Svankmajer. So they set up a situation that was sort of like an espionage where they worked through UK's Channel 4 and arranged to get Alice made. And a German TV station, Channel 4, went into it, and all the private investors came in, and they had to tell the it was like fuck, what's that movie called where they're making a fake movie to cover up their Argo.
Yeah.
It's like Argo, where they're making a fake movie called Demystification of Time and Space, which was approved by government censors. And at some point, someone ratted them out. And the Czechs, at this point, we're talking like 1988. So like the Soviet Union's already not looking great. And so the Czechs decided maybe we actually want to have award-winning filmmaker from our country at this point. So they decided to let him finish it, and then he did, and it was sort of a art house hit.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, everything like Bakshi, he is a very essential and influential filmmaker in a very specific type of filmmaking. And so everybody from the Brothers Quay, yeah, Fred Struer is the guy who made the Tool videos. I think even Phil Tippett, who recently made Mad God, would tell you he was inspired by Svankmajer, even though Tippett is sort of a contemporary.
Yeah, I had said
Um,
I don't know if I got if it got picked up, but I know that Christopher Nolan's a huge fan of the Brothers Quay.
yes, yes,
I think
yeah,
didn't he produce
and
a
yeah,
documentary about them or something?
yes, he did. And I don't think I've ever seen it, but yes, he did. There was recently a Japanese movie called by Takahide Hori called Junkhead that I got a review copy of that was just made by literally one guy, which was pretty cool. Very much like it. And I honestly see some of Tetsuo the Iron Man in it, and I think that that's a case of it just being sort of the miasma of the world, because I don't know if I feel like I can't remember the name of the guy who made Tetsuo the Iron Man. It doesn't matter. I feel like
I can picture the Arrow box set in my head, but
yeah, Tsukamoto.
yeah.
I don't think Tsukamoto and Svankmajer were necessarily aware of each other, but they were clearly kind of pulling from the same.
I mean, yeah,
Uh,
because I don't have strong memories of Tetsuo. I saw it when I was a teenager, and I was not ready for it at the time. But I mean, I do have a vague recollection of it looking very similar, but that might also just be the way it looks when you animate human beings as stop motion.
as stop motion, right? Which is what Tetsuo is full of. So, and then the other thing, I'm not very good with this sort of whole thing. I don't know a lot of Czech film. I do know some of the Polish surrealists. There's Walerian Borwerzik,
Yeah.
who was way hornier than Schwankmeyer and did more traditional animation. It sort of all reminds me of that. And it's a very dark, nightmarish vibe. It really feels like this movie in particular, Alice too, but this movie in particular feels like not just dream logic, but nightmare logic, or at least stress dream logic. Because a lot of it is just his his environment just keeps shifting around him. So he's suddenly in a theater in front of people and he didn't mean to be, or if he goes outside, there's this nonsense scene where he goes to a restaurant and they have to get he has to drill into the table to get the alcohol out, and it's just surrealist kind of what's the word when you have a
Vignette.
bunch of vignette, thank you.
Mhm.
It's just a surrealist vignette. Most of it's vignettes, but the parts that are the plot are like you have to go do this thing and you don't know why you're doing this thing, but you're doing it, and then the house you're in, the architecture makes no sense. That's just like 80% of my stress dreams are that exact thing, is I'm stuck somewhere that makes no sense and I have to do some stupid task and I don't even understand why I'm doing it.
I mean, even though I liked it, I watched it as a dubbed version on YouTube. Even though I liked it, I think that dream logic is part of the reason that I had such trouble following it, even though I should have been able to understand the individual scenes. It's because these dots are placed so far away from each other, and everything in between it is like a little, like it's just basically a little short film about something totally different that doesn't really.
Mhm.
That doesn't have a literal connection. Like it's sort of meandering through these little adventures that he goes on. And so I had a lot of trouble following it as a story, but I still found it very visually interesting. There's a lot of stuff with these full-sized marionettes, which it might
Yeah.
also be miniature. He does a great job of like cutting back and forth, so you can't really, like, it's not like, sometimes they look like they're human sized and then sometimes they look like they're small. And
I will say that one time the live action and animation interact is that but it is sort of cheating, but eventually he becomes one of the marionettes,
Mhm.
and it's probably the funniest joke, like flat out joke in the movie, because it's sort of a satire, where he's trying to sign the contract, which is the story of Faust. He signs away his soul, and these little angels land on his shoulder, and they keep running down and breaking the pen in half.
Yeah, and then the
Um,
devil just like blasts them all off.
yeah,
And that I love. I mean, the animation for that stuff is all fantastic. My favorite joke is probably when the one puppet marionette guy, he doesn't like reading the book, so he like puts his butt on it.
I like the bit where it's the jester marionette
Yeah.
keeps invoking and then sending away Satan. I watched it in Czech, So I wasn't positive that that was what was happening, but I finally figured out. And there's this whole thing where the main character has left, and the characters who are representing Satan in this man-sized play are trying to like catch a cab, and then he invokes them and they have to run back inside. And on the Czech dub, every time they run back inside, they go. And I don't know if they did that on the English dub, but it is so fucking funny. And at one point, there's two of them for some reason, both going.
I liked another thing that stood out to me was this part where there's a baby that gets born in a test tube. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stuff where like he talks to himself, and the other version of himself is like a monster. So you see his head in the ground, and it's like it like gets taken over by the clay animation, and then turns into something else, so it can talk to him. Doesn't look like him anymore, or vice versa. Like it, something else.
Yeah, that like he sort of like Satan takes his own, or I guess in this version it's Mephistopheles.
Yeah.
Mephistopheles is a ska band. It's real. It's a real band. It's a real band. They sang the Bumblebee Tuna song as a ska song. I had their album in high school. No, Mephistopheles. Yeah, takes on his face basically.
But yeah, and then there's these two guys that are like basically forcing him into it, that are sort of the orchestrators of the play. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that I just didn't really understand what was going on part of the time, but definitely great to look at. I would like to watch it again, with like a proper transfer with proper subtitles and stuff like that. Then maybe I would be able to follow it a little better.
I mean, and it's one of those things where it's like people would call it a horror movie, but they don't really know why. But there's like a hobo who has a severed leg, is menaced by a stray dog, which is played for laughs, but that's like a pretty horrific image. Mm-hmm. And he is tricked into having sex with the Satan puppet. And there's a reveal that he's been having sex with this sort of maggoty hole in the puppet. That's pretty fucking gross.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like a lot of art house films, especially foreign art house films, where you aren't necessarily sure you're getting the cultural references.
Yeah.
He is clearly making implied meanings and metaphors, and I'm just not getting them. So I'm just going with it, and I'm just assuming things, but I'm trying not to assume too much, because again, it's just not my culture. It's not something I understand. And so I was really just sort of going with it as nightmare logic, but I'm sure that there's all sorts of heavy implications to a lot of it.
I guess more than anything, one of the things that I did think was that is sort of interesting overall is that that the only example of that I could think of in which someone actually did the Roger Rabbit style thing is Monkey Bone. That's the only one that I can come up with offhand. And then you maybe suggested that the Michael Jackson video for Moonraker.
It was the feature version of Moonwalker has a bit, and I just thought of this when we started talking, has a bit where Michael Jackson becomes like a rabbit and he wanders around a Hollywood lot. And also the Svankmajer's next movie, Little Otek, which is pretty also very good. That one's about it didn't feel quite right. It didn't feel like it was fitting in, but the stop motion does interact with people a little bit more, because it's about what do they call basically a mandrake root that is raised and gets enough affection being raised that it becomes a baby, like a living thing. And so there'll be scenes where people are holding and the roots growing and stuff like that. But it just felt like it was something outside of what we were going for here. And it also felt it was too late. It was too far removed from Roger Rabbit to really fit.
I mean, more than anything, I just feel like, especially based on what you said, since this was my first Svankmajer, it just mostly feels like him following his own, his own artistic, niche, than being in reference to anything or attempting something with the technology or the idea of combining animation and live action. I mean, it sounds like that he was doing it before and continued to do it afterward.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think I have a note here that I'm not sure if I agree with anymore, but I wrote that it kind of reminded me of the Russian horror comedy V, which then made me think of Evil Dead. And there are some Evil Dead-esque things here, but that wouldn't have been. Evil Dead technically came out before Alice. I don't. Evil Dead came out around the same time as Dimensions of Dialogue, so I don't think there was actually uh, any sort of either way.
And
But there's some,
that may also just be sort of the nature of the technology that was available to Sam
yeah.
Raimi. Like, there's a lot of claymation just by necessity at the end of the original Evil Dead when
Mhm.
everything's melting and stuff, and then stop motion is the way that they would do the most logical way to do the headless dance in the second movie. So
Yeah, and some of the point of view, the evil point of view shots have a kind of stop motion quality to them because they are in like fast forward.
Mhm.
Um,
And then maybe a little whatever remnants of oh, I guess that would be another example is Jason and the Argonauts. That would be another example of stop motion.
yeah, and so that wouldn't count for what we're going here because it's supposed to look. Oh, geez, now it's like a thing because those are supposed to look real, uh, but like I don't know, like because that's where we have like the next movie is kind of. I should say one more thing before I go into this is Peter Sipek or Chipek. I'm not sure how you pronounce this name. Peter Chipek. I'm going to say he died 10 days after this movie premiered, and that's just really sad. That made me really really sad. Is that he wasn't that old, and it just sucked
Hopefully,
that
yeah,
happened.
before he passed away.
Yeah, I assume he would have.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I'll say that for I've seen 3 of Svankmajer's feature length movies, and I think this is the most eclectic one. So I don't know if it's like the most accessible of the 3, but it's like the one that has the most stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I would honestly recommend starting with it, but I'm not sure if I should say that. But the question we kept on coming across when we were putting this together is at what point does CG animation is what is a cartoon character and what is supposed to look real, so we're not supposed to take it as a cartoon character?
Well, because like
And that
obviously, if you think of like Jar Jar Binks, that's not the same thing. You're just supposed to believe Jar Jar Binks is a creature that exists
yeah,
in the world of Star Wars, or Gollum. Like it is technically animated, but it's not like we wanted the animation to be acknowledged. I think within the story of the movie.
I mean, yeah. If we're just doing animation interacting with people, that's like most movies now.
Yeah,
At least most theatrical movies, major release movies. And but I didn't even think of the fact that a lot of those Harryhausen movies skirt that line, where I'm not sure if those are supposed to look like they exist in our world. We're supposed to interact with them, so maybe they don't. But then that makes me think that maybe I shouldn't have counted the Schwankmeyer things because they're supposed to. I don't know. I don't know. I guess I'm glad we included it because I got to see it and we got to talk about it and this was interesting. But yeah, maybe it doesn't fit. The more I think about it, but so that idea of when does CG count? When we made the list, we picked movies where it felt pretty obvious, like Scooby Doo was supposed to look like a real dog in those movies,
sort of. I
but
mean, I think he's supposed to. I think you could go either way on that one. I don't. I
yeah,
think it's sort of because it's like obviously the audience knows that it is a CG creature, and I
right.
think they also know that this is a live action movie based on a cartoon. So it's not. It's not like it's supposed to look like a. You're just not supposed to believe that it's a dog. You're supposed to look at it and think Scooby Doo. So that one's kind of ambiguous, I would say.
But then there's something like the which I didn't see, but I saw the trailers for the Chippendale movie
Oh
that
yes,
came out
yes.
with it.
I actually, out of pure coincidence, I saw that, and that is definitely a movie that is applicable for this.
So we went with I think that probably Space Jam is the first to do this, and you said you know something about it.
But what I would say is that I do think that Space Jam is intentionally trying to evoke 2D animated characters. I mean, they have shading, and the animation is definitely done with computers. But I don't. I think you are supposed to think of them as the Looney Tunes that exist traditionally. And it sounds like maybe the new one, which I didn't see, the Space Jam: A New Legacy. Sounds like maybe that one's more on the other side of it, where like Bugs Bunny has fur and stuff, and so
Right.
that's a little more like this is a creature that exists in the world, and it's not animated. But I think based just on the way the characters in Space Jam act, I think Space Jam and Looney Tunes Back in Action, those are supposed to be, you're supposed to be looking at animation, even if it looks dimensional and it has shading and stuff. They're supposed to be 2D cartoons.
And so the movie we went with that sort of skirts the line here, where it's 3D animation clearly, but it's supposed to be sort of a, C, a CG version of hand animation, is The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle from 2000. Um, and I just watched this a little bit before we started talking. This is directed by Des McAnuff, and it was interesting. He does stage stuff mostly.
Yeah.
So I thought that was weird that he ended up with this. I'm sure there's a story behind it, but
The main reason that I suggested this movie, which I have seen a couple of times,
okay.
is like a movie that people like to cite because I both Gabe and I, as we've said, are not big fans of Space Jam, and I know that
Yeah,
Joe Dante is not a fan of Space Jam because Joe Dante felt like the characters in Space Jam did not act like the Looney Tunes.
right.
So, I like Joe Dante. I've watched Back in Action a couple of times, and it is definitely significantly better than Space Jam. But
Yeah.
also, the thing that really stands out to me every time I watch it is like this movie is made for people who are 70 years old. And I feel like
Yeah.
Rocky and Bullwinkle is interesting because it's not a great movie, but I do think Rocky and Bullwinkle does a much better job of both being very faithful to what I remember Rocky and Bullwinkle being. I didn't see a lot of Rocky and Bullwinkle, but you watch it and you feel like, oh yeah, this is a pretty faithful adaptation of what the cartoon probably was. And it also feels like at least I can watch this and understand that I could believe that kids in 2000 would probably understand these jokes. Like they don't have to be very old to understand what anyone's talking about. Like this isn't, it's not like the movie's hip, but it does feel like you can understand how it might have been a reasonable attempt to appeal to a new generation without changing the thing too much.
Yeah. And I mean, I watched a lot of reruns in syndication, and I think that was only because my parents had nostalgia for it, so they let me.
Mhm.
They didn't like say, okay, enough TV. But if Rocky and Bullwinkle and Fractured Fairy Tales were on, they were like, oh, let's watch this with you. It's definitely in keeping with that universe. And I guess you're gonna have you seen the Brady Bunch movie
Yes,
recently?
I mean, the Brady Bunch movie is very good. I haven't seen it recently, but I have seen it.
Is it the same idea where it's like these characters from the 60s thing are now in the real world and kind of confused by things?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think that the with the Brady Bunch, there's really no explanation for it. They've just been the same since
Yeah.
since the show or the time of the show, and they're interacting with people who are contemporary. So it does have
Okay.
that same conceit.
So that would have been not too far before this, and that had a sequel actually. So this was kind of an idea, I guess, that people, it was like boomer stuff finding itself in the 90s and being like, whoa, it's kind of it's kind of outdated, but in a charming way.
Yeah,
Like I think that's cute that we did that in the 90s a lot.
and that's really how I would sum up the movie. The biggest problem with it is that it is very base. It has one note and it doesn't really deviate from it, so it gets
Mhm.
tiring after a while. But it is very cheerful and punny and sort of old fashioned in a way that seems kind of cute. Like you wish it was a little wittier, but
Mhm.
it is. It's totally decent, middle of the road. If everybody seems to be like, it's very funny that you go onto IMDb and like the first two pieces of trivia are Robert De Niro did this movie for the paycheck and Jason Alexander did this movie for the paycheck. Like those are like the top two pieces of trivia on IMDb.
Yeah.
They both just did it for the money, but everybody seems generally competent. Like they get it, and the movie is delivers on its like meager promise, basically.
Apparently the development was going to be Danny DeVito and Meryl Streep as Boris and Natasha. I don't think Alexander's very good in this. I think that he doesn't feel like the character at all.
Maybe he
me.
doesn't feel like well, I would also say that both Boris and Natasha are definitely underwritten. Natasha
Yeah,
has
poor
almost nothing.
Renee Russo has nothing to do.
Yeah.
I feel like she looks the part and she's doing the physicality perfect, but it's like she has hardly any lines.
Hmm.
And I guess this was produced by De Niro's company,
Hmm.
so he kind of gives himself all the best the best stuff. Though it's also full of a million cameos from character actors and comedians that would have been very popular in 1999, I guess. Like 2000, it feels like we're starting to move away from some of them, but and they hired the original Rocky, June Foray, to do both Rocky and the narrator's mother, because the narrator gets sucked into the real world with them, which is probably the best joke in the whole movie. Is that he's been having to narrate them even after his show got canceled. He's still narrating things because that's his only. He barely even has a body. Like we see the back of his head a couple times, but like he's just this entity that's stuck in limbo now because this show doesn't exist anymore. Those are some of the funniest gags that are definitely something you would do in the old show, where there'll be meta gags where he'll say something to the person on screen or get replied to by the person on screen. Those are cute.
Um,
They couldn't use the original Bullwinkle. Bill Scott had passed away.
hmm. And she also does the voice of Natasha when Natasha's a cartoon.
That's right. When they turn back into cartoons, they're as close to the original voices as they could get them. I forgot about that. The human lead is Piper Perabo, and
uh,
it kind of feels like she's in a Muppet movie. Like she feels like the human in a Muppet movie to me.
I did like that they named her Karen Sympathy. That's kind of a funny joke.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
she's not
she's
like.
not very good at the eye contact part,
Mhm.
but I'm guessing that was a technical issue, not her
Well, one
problem.
thing that I was going to say about that is I did appreciate that Des McAnuff. He does seem to have a consciousness of there's a limitation to how much he can do with that. So
Hmm.
there is a tendency for the movie to just cut to the actor, like to cut from the animated characters and then cut to the actor, so he doesn't have to worry about the eye lines and things matching that often.
Yeah, and she's the one who interacts with them the most.
Mhm. Although
Most of the other actors are just watching them.
there is a completely inexplicable script decision to separate her from them for like a third of the movie, which I don't get. Like that seems weird because she's kind of like the dynamic between them feels kind of like the closest thing to the movie has to an engine because it's basically
Hmm.
just get from point A to point B. There's not really a complicated plot, so like removing her from it is very weird.
Yeah, and I think it's supposed to be like the absurdist thing that used to happen on the old show, but it doesn't really work for that. That's one of the things I made a note here is that you can't those episodes were like 5 minutes and they would sometimes continue, but it was like a series of 5 minute episodes. It's just too anarchic to really to stretch it out over that whole period. It doesn't really work. So yeah, I think that it's ultimately the same thing where we're stuck with vignettes and it's not really a much of a centralized plot. It's something that the fearless leader Boris and Natasha are taking over a television station, and they're are basically all television stations, and they're going to turn us all into zombies and then be elected president. The fearless leader will be elected president, and
One of the jokes that I really did like is all of the television shows they create that are just Cold War spies doing
yeah,
wacky nonsense.
right, the ridiculous like black glasses and black hat spy, like spy versus spy guys, but they're doing yeah. I think that the technology actually works pretty well. I think Rocky looks a little weird. I think
Yeah,
Bullwinkle looks pretty good.
for some
uh,
reason, for I don't really understand it, but uh, Bullwinkle feels fine, and then Rocky looks kind of dead-eyed in that CG,
yeah,
and it's
I don't I can't explain it.
yeah, I don't get it.
But
Maybe it's because Rocky is doing more emoting, and Bullwinkle is just sort of cheerfully stupid the whole movie. Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, that's the one thing that really sort of gets in the way is that.
Well, and the thing it's sort of the live action stretches sort of turn into sort of a subpar Naked Gun movie at times,
Mhm.
and I'm already not very into the Naked Gun movies, so I got a little antsy as we're getting towards the middle of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then at a certain point, I suddenly realized that it actually, the villain's plan is very similar to Josie and the Pussycats.
Yes, I was thinking a little bit of Josie and the Pussycats while I was watching.
Which is just such a better movie.
Yeah.
And it's funny because Josie and the Pussycats is full of dated pop culture references, but in the context of that film, it's good that they're dated because they seem cringe and lame because that's part of the point of the movie. Whereas in this one, it's like, well, Rocky wouldn't, or Bullwinkle wouldn't acknowledge. He wouldn't say I'm getting jiggy with it. That's weird. Let's not do that, guys.
Why did they have to do that? That was one of the worst. The rap thing. Although to the movie's credit, he doesn't actually sit there and rap. He just says, "I'm getting jiggy with it," and then that's the end of the joke.
Yeah, that's the end of it.
They actually have a great. They have a great joke about that in the Chip and Dale movie, where they like the character. That one's very meta. So that one's basically talking about all these other movies, and it is a Roger Rabbit sort of thing where there's this whole world where the animation and humans coexist, but they talk about, oh no, this is a thing that they always have to do in animated movies where they make the characters rap, and they reluctantly do a rap, and they hate it the whole time.
Man, maybe 2000 was just barely out of the realm of making characters rap. Like maybe if it was 2 years made 2 years prior. It said that they were in production since '92. So yeah,
No,
this could have been rapping.
I would, even though the rap would easily be the low point of the movie, I do want to know what a Kenneth Lonergan rap would have consisted of. This is written by the great screenwriter of Margaret by the Sea and Manchester by the Sea and Margaret. You can count on me.
I don't think I realized that. I didn't actually look at who wrote it. You know what I just realized? Actually, it would actually be De Niro who did the rap, and it would have been a non-ironic version of the rap from the Muppets. This doesn't have a lot of references to Roger Rabbit, but I did notice they demonstrate the way to kill a cartoon, which is sort of thematically similar to the dip scene. And the cartoon they kill looks a lot like Doom's weasel henchman. So I felt like that was supposed to be a kind of reference.
Well, because that's the one scene where they openly cite Roger Rabbit.
Did they? And I just missed it?
Yeah, because one of the characters says, there's never been a way to kill a cartoon. And another character is like, well, what about Roger Rabbit? And that was Fearless Leader saying that. And then he clearly doesn't like the idea that he was wrong, so everybody pretends that wasn't said.
Okay, I missed that joke. Okay, well that makes more sense. The whole reference thing is kind of funny too, because it's funny to watch a movie about characters from the 60s entering the 90s and the early millennium and being blown away by technology, and all the technology is now 24 years old and just ridiculously dated, like the little laptop they have. I know it has sci-fi stuff on it, but it's still the same crappy laptop that like my first laptop that I got for free because someone else didn't want it.
Some of the technology they put in the movie doesn't even exist. What is the Keenan and Kel have a fax machine in their car? I don't think that ever existed in that way.
That one was extra funny to me because Bullwinkle's shocked by a fax, and I'm like, faxes predate the fucking phone, man. Come on, you have to know what a fax is. But I guess he's Bullwinkle, and he definitely wouldn't understand why there would be one in a car. But there was the actually part of my brain was like, there were faxes in your time, Bullwinkle?
The other one that doesn't really exist is whatever Randy Quaid uses to put Bullwinkle in the computer. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
Either. That's just
it's like a weird scanner,
yeah,
I guess. And then he gets printed. I liked that touch. And I liked that when they show that they've turned people into vegetables, I immediately recognized Doug Jones's face through his
yeah, I saw him when he turned back into a human.
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, that's him." And then he turned into a human. I'm like, "Yep, that was him."
One of my big gripes was they missed a great joke, which is they have this really subtle throwaway gag where they're driving across America and every town looks exactly the same, and they're all fake brands. They're all made up versions of McDonald's and stuff like that. And I thought they really missed a step, that when he goes into the computer and there's logos everywhere, that it should have been a digital version of the exact same thing. But instead, when he's in the computer, it's all real brands like America Online and stuff.
Yeah, that is kind of, I guess the "you got mail" joke is a good gag, but you don't have to brand the rest of it. My only other note is that the cheesy soft rock adult contemporary end credits song "Through the Eyes of a Child" was co-written by Mark Mothersbaugh. I thought that was really weird.
I think I think he might have done the score too.
He might have, and so he just got involved with it.
Mm.
It's an okay score. It's a little overbrought, but I guess that's kind of makes sense in what we're dealing with here.
Also, you might just like the respite from all the other scores that you didn't like.
Really, really bad ones. Yeah.
The other thing that I liked, which has nothing to do with the animation, would be Jonathan Winters continually showing up as a different.
As different guys.
That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Even though
Yeah, actually,
no child in 2000 had any idea who the fuck Jonathan Winters was.
you know, he was on a pretty popular sitcom in the mid 90s, so maybe some kids would have recognized him. That's what I knew him from.
For a movie that's supposed to have hip cameos, I mean,
Yeah, Billy Crystal. No one hipper than Billy Crystal.
yeah, Billy Crystal. Kenan and Kel is the closest they get, but then they
Yeah.
also have John Goodman, hot off of Coyote Ugly and Oh Brother Where Art Thou, things that
I forgot he was also in Coyote Ugly with Piper Perabo.
Yeah.
Is he her dad in that?
Yeah, he's her dad in that.
Oh my god, I didn't put that together. That's so funny.
And
I was like, why hasn't Piper Perabo been in anything? And I looked it up, and she's apparently been very busy on TV shows I just don't happen to watch. So I'm like,
right.
Okay, I just haven't been paying attention. She's fine.
Yeah, she
wasn't chased out of the industry for some reason.
She's in Looper. That was the
Oh, that's right. She's in Looper. She's great in that.
She's in Looper and she's in The Prestige. Those are the two that come to mind as semi-ish, like big enough.
Yeah.
There are obviously long gaps between The Prestige in 2008 and Looper in 2012 and now, but still, those are things that come to mind.
Goddamn, Looper is more than 10 years old.
It is.
Woof.
The 4K was the 10th anniversary thing.
Yeah. Jesus. Oh well.
But yeah,
that's
a pleasant, inoffensive sort of whatever. Like it's just good enough that I understand why I thought, hey, this might be kind of good, and then it was not good enough to really remember. Just looked up Piper Perabo, and she was also in a movie that I liked that is a sort of artistic comic take on school shootings.
Oh, fun. Wow.
It's called Spontaneous. It's a pretty good movie, but yeah, it's about kids who are in high school, and then people start randomly exploding.
Okay. That's one way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I suggest looking into all those other Svankmajer movies and probably seeing Back in Action. I remember it being okay.
It is. I mean, there are definitely good moments, but like I said, I think when you watch it again, you'll be like, wow, this is really not for children. Like, the children are just not going to give a shit about any of this. And
yeah.
You sort of even though Space Jam might not be a good movie, you sort of understand, yeah, I guess I get it why Space Jam is the popular one and Back in Action is not.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I suppose the real thing we should say is that fuck you, David Zaslav. Give us Coyote versus Acme.
Yeah.
I desperately want to see it. Everybody said it was good. Actually, one of the people who was like really out there stumping for it on Twitter was the guy who wrote and directed Spontaneous. So full circle.
Oh. Yeah, the one we almost covered that I couldn't remember if it had enough interaction was Twilight of the Cockroaches, which is a cool movie, but I honestly can't remember how often the human interacts with the animated cockroaches. So
I guess that would be a reason that we could have also to connect to that. That would be a reason we would disqualify Joe's apartment, because the cockroaches are just supposed to be real cockroaches.
Real cockroaches, yeah.
Even though it is true that the movie, you can tell that was a movie that was made by animators, and there's sort of a degree of animated tribute in some of it. Like, they do some of the stop motion with live people stuff when at the end when they grow the whole garden for Joe as an apology.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that movie, and it was, yeah.
Which you can now watch on a very beautiful 4K remastered Warner Archive Blu-ray.
That's crazy.
It looks incredible. Yeah. Like, it's just one of the nicest looking 90s transfers that I've ever seen.
Weird. What can you tell people? Well, actually, Tyler has been writing reviews for Genre
I was going to
Grinder.
say, I write for this website that you've probably never heard of called Genre Grinder.
And yeah, he's been covering some of the movies that he's interested in, and I'm not particularly wanting to write about.
And I'm very skilled at doing it as slowly as possible, which I'm sure makes you want to tear your hair out.
No, it's fine. I just laughed into the mic. I've got a bunch of air on it. Where can they find you otherwise?
You can find me on Twitter at Tyler Gill Foster, at Tyler Gill Foster. That's the main place you can find me.
Okay.
I remain there even as it descends into madness.
Well, you can find me as usual on the Genre Grinder Facebook, on the Genre Grinder Twitter, which is again only really used for links at this point. The Genre Grinder website. You can find me as Gabe Powers on Blue Sky now, and also as Gabe Powers, one word, on Letterboxd.
No, you can find me on Letterboxd too. It's not Tyler Gill, it's just Tyler G. Foster.
Tyler G. Foster, not Gilbert.
No.
Gilberto.
I'm sure I told this before. I said this before, but my Korean name was On Gil Dong, and then my well-meaning American parents thought they should keep part of my Korean name, so they kept the Gil, which just sounds like a white guy's name, which is really funny to me.
Yeah, Gil. Good old Gil. You could go by Gil. You look like a Gil.
Oh,
I see it. I also want to thank my Patreon subscribers. Again, as I keep saying, I'm getting just enough money to cover the cost of the website, so I'm not doing that part out of pocket anymore. So very big thanks to those people. Until next time, remember to practice safe sex with animated characters, because unprotected copulation may tear a hole in space-time and turn the world into a cartoon hellscape.
And the hellscape might be like Cool World, which would be even worse. That's
even worse. Yeah. A boring, weird hellscape. Good night. Oh no, I should do a ba-beep, ba-beep, ba-deep. That's all, folks.